Here's another Subscribe Star requested movie review, Time After Time, from 1979, starring Malcolm McDowell as the time machine inventor H.G. Wells, David Warner as John Stevenson, Jack the Ripper, and Mary Steenburgen as H.G. Wells' love interest, Amy. The film was written and directed by Nicholas Meyer, who of course also would go on to direct Star Trek II and VI, and he wrote Star Trek IV. Interestingly enough, Star Trek IV is a time travel story that also takes place in San Francisco and also includes scenes where characters have to try to pawn items for local currency. And there's obviously two other Star Trek connections, in that Malcolm McDowell would go on to play Tolian Soren in Star Trek Generations, and David Warner appeared several times on Star Trek, in Star Trek The Next Generation, in Star Treks V and VI. Coincidentally, Mary Steenburgen would later appear in another time travel film, Back to the Future 3, where she once again has a romance with a time traveller. Beginning in London in 1893, we see a prostitute being murdered by an unseen man, who is of course Jack the Ripper. Meantime, H.G. Wells is having a dinner party with some friends and reveals to them his time machine, which they're impressed by but not exactly convinced by this contraption. Among the group is his friend John Stevenson, a doctor and frequent chess opponent of his. When the police arrive at Wells' home, saying that they're looking for the Ripper in the area, Stevenson escapes in the time machine and travels to 1979. When the machine returns, which it's programmed to do without the non-return key, Wells is able to travel forward to try to track him down. He materializes in 1979 in a museum exhibit about Wells, which includes the machine itself. But now he's in San Francisco, and he spends some time like a fish out of water, trying to come to terms with the incredible culture shock of the place, its technology, modern morality, language, and McDonald's. He eventually visits a bank and exchanges his old money for a few dollars, and figures that Stevenson would have had to do the same thing. So he visits several banks before finding Amy, a bank employee who tells him that a man matching the description of Stevenson exchanged money there. She feels an instant romantic spark for Wells, though I do think it's a little forced, and as is typical with romance in these kinds of films, it all happens too fast to be believable. But anyway, they spend some time together, and she tells him that Stevenson is staying at a particular hotel, and Wells goes to track him down. Stevenson is surprised and impressed by Wells' resourcefulness and initially offers him a peaceful resolution: give him the non-return key and leave 1979. Stevenson wishes to remain in the future, which of course Wells protests to. He wants to bring Stevenson back to the 1890s so that he can face justice. But of course, it's absurd to think that Stevenson is going to come quietly, hand himself over, go back in time, and just face the music. H.G. Wells is an idealist, a naive utopianist. He believes humanity can achieve a future of total equality. He thinks socialism is a stepping stone to an enlightened utopia, and that all of our problems can be overcome. John Stevenson is a bit more realistic. He believes that man's base nature cannot be overcome, and that ultimately we're the same throughout history. We're either predator or prey. He thinks the world will always be dog eat dog. Stevenson shows him television news broadcasts in his hotel room, showing him a world of violence and chaos. He says he feels at home in such a place, that he belongs there, whereas Wells does not belong there. He feels that, in a way, they haven't gone forward in time, but backwards, given that humanity has regressed to a more savage state rather than a more civilized one. They fight, and predictably Stevenson overpowers Wells and escapes. The film then slows down a bit, I have to say, while Wells and Amy's relationship receives some development. Meantime, Stevenson returns to his murderous ways, killing prostitutes in the seedier parts of San Francisco. These events begin to make the news. As you'd expect, eventually Wells has to come clean with Amy about who he is and where he came from. He has to tell her that he's a time traveler. Amy is insulted by this. In fact, she reacts quite similarly to how her character of Clara would react in Back to the Future 3 when Doc Brown tells her he's from the future. But when Wells takes her to the museum exhibit, he convinces her by giving her a demonstration of the time machine's capabilities. He takes her forward a few days into the future, and then she reads a newspaper, and she discovers that she is going to be murdered by the Ripper. The film concludes with a showdown at the exhibit where Stevenson has Amy at knife point. He attempts to escape in the machine once more, but then Wells pulls out the external vaporizing equalizer. Stevenson is banished for all eternity, floating through time and space. The film concludes with Wells and Amy traveling back to 1893. Now, this is a decent time travel movie and generally one I found enjoyable enough. However, even back when I first watched it, I did find it sluggish in places. I think that's really my only major criticism, actually. The film's strength is without doubt its cast. Everyone does a fantastic job, but in particular, the theatrical and refined performances of McDowell and Warner. I mean, their chemistry, their dynamic is just absolutely phenomenal. Warner is sinister and chilling as Stevenson, a charismatic psychopath, a brilliant villain, and he steals every scene he's in. McDowell brilliantly conveys Wells' journey from confident idealist to a disquieted, disillusioned man out of time, and finally to the principled hero by the end. He's a classical British gentleman throughout the movie and a likeable protagonist. I think this film goes very well with another time travel story from around the same time, 1980s Somewhere in Time, with Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour, and Christopher Plummer. I have previously reviewed that film on the channel as well, so go ahead and check it out. They have a kind of a similar vibe, actually, in many respects. Finally, Time After Time is an enjoyable time travel romp, but it is sluggish in places. However, the script is strong, the mechanics of the time travel plot device are simple, easy to follow, and well explained. It's not a highly technical sci-fi movie. And there's enough rising tension in the final dramatic act to keep the viewer engaged. If you haven't watched this classic before, or you haven't seen it in a while, go ahead and give it a go. So guys, let me know your thoughts on this one. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, hit that notification bell to be notified of future updates. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.